tax cuts pay for themselves?
They do not.
Leader Boehner, he puts it right to you.
The only way we're going to get our economy going again and solve our budget problems is to get the economy moving, get more people back to work where they can care for their own families, and begin to expand the tax rules.
But Leader Boehner, I'm sorry, you're not being
problem.
responsive to a specific point, which is how can you be for cutting the deficit and also cutting taxes as well when they're not paid for?
Listen, you can't raise taxes in the middle of a weak economy without risking a double dip in this recession. President Obama's favorite Republican economist, Mark Zandi, came out several weeks ago and made it clear that raising taxes at this point in the economy is a very bad idea.
But do you agree that tax cuts cannot be paid for?
Without a help.
But tax cuts are not paid for. Is that correct?
I am not for raising taxes on the American people in a soft economy.
That's not the question,
and the
Leader
people
Boehner.
that
The
the
question
president
is,
wants to tax.
are tax cuts paid for or not?
That's why I've asked to sit down soon with leaders of both parties so that we can have an extended discussion about what we can do together to move this country forward.
Well, I think, our goal continues to be to make tax relief permanent and to reform the tax code so we can be more competitive as a nation. If we can't accomplish that now, let's take those first steps toward that direction.
I don't see how we can afford to borrow an additional $700 billion from other countries to make all the Bush tax cuts permanent.
Entire chapter in the book talking about the financial meltdown
Right.
last year of your presidency. In that year, the country lost about 2.6 million jobs. The banking system nearly collapsed. The housing market did collapse, and we fell into the deepest recession since the Great Depression. How much of the blame for that should be laid at your feet and on your policies?
So my conscience is clear when it came time to recognize an impending problem.
But
now,
back to the original question, how much of the blame do you deserve for that economic meltdown?
anytime you're in power and there's a problem, you're going to get blamed, and I fully understand that. And I walk people through the reason why I use taxpayers' money to bail out Wall Street. And the lesson there is that I had to set aside an ideology, which was if you make a bad mistake, you pay for it in the marketplace. And the hardest thing for me was not whether or not blame was assigned. The hardest thing for me was to explain to hardworking Americans why we were using their taxpayers' their money to prop up those who they were blaming for the crisis.
While we're talking, in your book you wrote, quote, when I entered politics, I made a decision I would confront problems, not pass them on to future generations, end quote. Let's talk about the deficit.
Right.
In the case of the deficit, didn't you do the opposite? Didn't you pass it along to a future generation? And you left office with a $10.7 trillion deficit.
No.
I voted against the tax cut. I voted against it because I didn't think there was sufficient relief for working Americans.
And I was thinking, Obama wants to raise taxes on people who make over $250,000. Although people keep saying he's going to raise your taxes. He's not going to raise all your taxes. He's only raising people who are over 250. And those people over 250 are going to go back to the rate that we were all paying when Clinton was in office.
So, you're willing to give up money for your country?
I am.
Horrors.
Tax.
The rich are always going to say that, just give us more money and we'll go out and spend more and then it'll all trickle down to the rest of you. But that has not worked the last 10 years, and I hope the American public is catching on.
Today, I say to you that the challenges we face are real. They are serious and they are many. They will not be met easily or in a short span of time. But know this, America, they will be met.
I think you might extend them further for the lower class, middle class, maybe upper middle class. But I think that you should raise taxes on the very rich.
It's as if they drove America's car into the ditch. They drove it in the ditch, and it was a big ditch. And so I came along, and we put on our boots, and we went down into the ditch. And it was hot down there, and it was muddy. There were bugs. But we said that's okay. Even though we didn't drive it into the ditch, it's still our responsibility to get that car out of the ditch. And so we pushed, and we pushed, and every once in a while we'd look up, and up on the road you'd see the Republicans standing there, fanning themselves, sipping on a Slurpee, having a latte. And we'd say, hey, why don't you come down and help push a little bit? We need some help down here. And they'd say, no, that's all right. They said, but you need to push harder. You're not pushing the right way. And we just kept on pushing. We kept on pushing. Finally, we get this car up on level ground. It's pointing in the right direction. We're ready to move America forward. But the next thing we know, we get this tap on our shoulder, and we look back, and who is it? It's the Republicans. And they say, we want the keys back. You can't have the keys back. You don't know how to drive. Now, if you want, you can roll with us, but you got to be in the back seat. I don't know if you've noticed, if you want to take your car forward, you got to put it in what? In D. If you want to go backwards, it goes what? We don't want to go backwards. We're moving America forward.